You are listening to Eastman's Flycast, an adventure fly fishing specific podcast covering travel, tactics, and next level insight. Now your host, Brian Barney.
Hey, what's happening, guys? Got a brand new Eastman's Flycast for you. So this week on the podcast, I have on a couple partners from Tom Morgan's Rod Company. So I stopped by their shop and was able to see their operation. I first connected with Matt Barber. He's on the podcast. We exchanged information. He introduced me to another partner, Joel. Like I say, they walked me through the entire process of building these rods. And they're just a small operation based out of Bozeman, Montana. And man, I was just so impressed with the process, their attention to detail, and the quality and craftsmanship they put in these rods. They also let me toss one in the parking lot, and the rod just had this great action to it, accuracy, and then would just huck a line across this parking lot. So super fun to be able to toss one of their rods, to meet these guys, and see what goes into building a quality rod. So I learned a ton. These guys are also die-hard fly fishermen, and they have great insight into fly fishing techniques, tactics, rods, and action. So it just made for a really good conversation. I enjoyed it. I think you guys will enjoy it too. I want to thank our sponsor for today's show, Avid Max. Avid Max came on as a partner with the podcast, and I really appreciate their support. They have a store that sits right outside of Denver. So you can go in person and talk to their staff and look over everything they have. They also have a great internet store. And you can get anything for fly fishing from Avid Max. They have rods, they have reels, they have lines. They have this great Western fly selection. They also have everything for fly tying. They have things for travel, for dogs, camera bags, things of that nature. They also have this great clearance section that's full of good deals on fly fishing gear. They carry all the top brands, and they're a great company. So if you're in the market for anything fly fishing, make sure to check them out. They also have some great content they put out as well. They do a Tying Tuesday where they do a featured fly and they tie that up. They also have a gear review. Just tons of great content. So check them out on their website, avidmax.com. And with that, man, we'll get into this podcast. Spring's starting to break loose in Montana. I've had some good days fishing. I've also had some tough days just exploring different rivers and can't quite get them to turn on yet, or timing isn't right, but been having a ton of fun. Going to go out with a couple buddies this weekend. We're going to go do a camping trip and a 2.5 day float or a 3 day float, different sections of this river. And so, man, I'm just super excited. Like I say, there's so many great rivers around the West, and you know, to be able to go fish a new one for me is super exciting. And so, yeah, connect with my buddies. My buddy Dylan's going to be there, and then he's got another one of his buddies there. So yeah, we'll connect, try to get a podcast recorded, and try to lock into some of these great big brown trout. So it should be super fun. So I'll let you guys know how it goes. Also, try to get out a solo episode about springtime fishing and some tactics that'll hopefully help you guys out at being more successful this spring. So I'll get one of those recorded as well. And just had some great guests coming up. Super excited about the podcast. So let's get into this. So this is Matt and Joel from Tom Morgan Rodsmiths. Yeah, great conversation. I'm your host, Brian Barney, Eastman's Flycast. Here we go. Okay, I'm live here. I stopped by Tom Morgan Rodsmiths, and so I'm meeting with Matt and Joel today, partners of Tom Morgan Rods. Man, you guys are doing amazing work.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, it's great to meet you.
Yeah, good to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys walked me through the entire process of building rods, and man, you guys are building. There's such an attention to detail, and you guys are really building custom rods in here.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting work to focus on the craftsmanship of building the rods. And sometimes we even forget when we do that to talk about how the rods fish. And it's kind of a balance between making these rods that cast beautifully and then the work, you know, the craftsmanship is is really top notch.
Yeah, it's funny. We were joking just before we started recording, and I think we spent a lot of time making fly rods, and I think we thought we'd spend a lot more time fishing than we do. And so sometimes we get caught up in the details of making the rod, and I think what Tom really focused on, and I think it's always interesting when you talk about fly rods and fly rod design, is where makers come from. And Tom was a fishing guide before he was anything else, and I think that fishing really informed his design. I think there are different designers who were competition casters or who fished in saltwater. Or, you have different things that inform what's important to you. And Tom's most important thing was to make a fly rod that fished really well. Later came the aesthetic of it and the craftsmanship of it. And sometimes it's easy to forget that when you're spending 8 hours a day polishing a fly rod, sanding it, and you're not out fishing them all the time.
Focusing on all the details. Yeah, that's great. I love that he focused on the fishing and action of that rod. And so give me a background. Tom Morgan comes from my neck of the woods, from Ennis, Montana. Give me a little background on Tom.
Yeah, so Tom's parents owned the El Western, just on Odell Creek there, just south of town. And he grew up as a little kid, basically, when his parents were working, he was out in the backyard, which was Odell Creek, and grew up fishing. And at a pretty young age, people discovered that he knew the spring creeks. He knew the Madison really well. And I think he became a guide just by de facto that people would request, I want to fish with the young guy that can show us around and would fly in from out of town to fish with him. And that's where it all began. And he began his guiding career there. He owned the tackle shop in Ennis for a while, and really was an excellent fisherman kind of before the heyday of fly fishing started.
Yeah, at the forefront of it.
Yeah, imagine the Madison with no boats. That was when Tom fished it.
Oh, my gosh. Matt, I think me and you talked about that a little bit. But, yeah, back in the day, I can't imagine chasing brown trout on these rivers. And it's so good nowadays. Like, I still think it's like the good old days of fly fishing, the information day and age. And there's still so many secrets, even around Montana, as far as the timing of the rivers and getting on them and the right patterns. But I can't imagine what he saw back in the day. Can you imagine all the big fish that sat in that river that he was able to target?
Yeah, I mean, he tells a story about fishing the Royal Wolf there, and I think it's two things. One is he talked about catching just fish after fish after fish, and he had a 3x5 card, and he was marking down, the sizes and the lengths of the fish, and we would, kill for a fraction of those fish in one time, and I'm sure that was all the time, but also a day when you probably didn't have to be too picky with the fly. If you got that Royal Wolf just to float, and you put it on the water in the right spot, and, you were pretty sure to get something there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he didn't nymph fish either. So, imagine that. Nymph fishing. It was just streamers, and streamers were gray ghosts, comets.
Girdle
bugs,
yeah.
They called streamers because they would swim them, just a totally different style. But, yeah, halcyon days for sure, 50s in Ennis. Yep.
Oh, I can't imagine. Yeah, that's wild. I bet he saw some pretty good fishing. And it's, even in today's day and age, it seems like you just have to put your time on the water. And you have to put up with some mediocre days, and then eventually you just hit one of those days that's magic. And whether that's the hatch or whether that's the fish turn on or the fish are looking in the spots where you're throwing or whatever the case is. But there's still some great fishing out there.
Yeah, I think the Madison makes me think about this, but a friend that's a guide told me, he said, just do the opposite of what everybody's doing. If it seems like everybody, conventional wisdom would say go to the outside of the bend because of the height of the water, go to the inside of the bend. If everybody's fishing to the left of the boat, fish to the right of the boat. And that's a great example on that river. If you can break the mold and not fish where you think you should, you catch fish all the time.
I love that. Yeah, those buckets and holes in the middle of the river and those seams that nobody can reach. And I actually do really good. Like, I love the streamer fishing down there on the Madison, and it's phenomenal. But the deal is like everybody fishes them out of a boat, stripping them back into the boat. And when I started to implement some of like my steelhead tactics, like swinging flies and able to bring a spey rod and able to cast across the river and swing it through the whole run, and then really mess with my T14 and my lengths of it and get down there where I'm ticking bottom, all of a sudden I can stop and fish these big holes different than anybody else is fishing them. And it's amazing some of the brown trout that I've pulled out of that. Like,
hold on, are we giving away too many secrets here?
It is the Madison, so I don't think we're giving away any secrets.
I'll show you the book of swing flies in my streamer box at some point.
Oh, cool. Yeah. They love that dead fly, especially like in these winter months, that swinging fly. Man, they like to eat that thing.
Yeah. I mean, they talk about that with steelhead fishing a lot, and so I'm going to get it over my head here, I'm sure, with some of your listeners.
Too.
But, that idea of just chugging a fly slowly in front of a nose, moving it low, deep, and slow instead of ripping. I think for some of those big fish, it's a pretty good tactic.
Well, and it gets down to their level, too.
Mm-hmm. Don't have to move. Yep.
That's
Who
it.
doesn't want a free cheeseburger?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and they're predatory by nature, as they like to chase those bait fish. And I think as those fish get bigger and bigger, they pay less attention to the hatches and more attention to the bait fish. And it's almost instinctual. Mm-hmm. Like I think, the big fish are always sitting in big fish spots. And I think they almost protect those spots. Like they'll almost hit just out of aggressiveness, to defend that spot, that A spot.
Yeah. I think that's kind of the prevailing theory now is that over a certain length, they become pretty much just carnivorous fish and often just nocturnal fish. Mm-hmm. So you get them low light periods, and those 25-inch fish plus are just eating other fish.
Yes.
They're not wasting any time on midges.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, it
occasionally a scud might get them every now and again or something, but they're not going to move much.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yep.
Well, getting back to Tom, and he so after his guiding career, he actually went and then worked for Winston, right?
Yeah, so he purchased Winston. He had
owned Winston.
I believe it was a guiding client of his that kind of staked him into Winston when they were for sale in 1971. And so he bought them. They were downtown San Francisco. They're a historic factory right downtown San Francisco. And Tom bought them and took over Winston. And they remained in San Francisco for a couple years. They moved to Twin Bridges, Montana in 1973. And Tom brought on a partner named Glenn Brackett, who kind of primarily started running the bamboo. Tom was kind of positioned to start running the fiberglass, and then when graphite became a popular material, he drove a lot of their graphite design and their graphite rods. And that's where those famous green rods came from. Those were really Tom's designs with some older graphite materials, and then eventually the IM6 rods, which became very well known. And I think, along with kind of that development profile and timeline, I think one of the things Tom was really known for was quality, like driving quality and standards in the fly fishing industry. I think he was a real particular person about how good a rod had to be before it left the factory. We see that really to the nth degree with what we do now because we make so few rods a year. But we're able to really focus on them. And for him, I think what he was able to do at Winston was really focus on a very, very high quality product. And that's what made the reputation of the green sticks, all over the country and the world.
Man, well, I hope you don't mind if I compare that rod that I casted out there. It felt a lot like a Winston.
Yeah, very similar philosophies, I think. Yeah. Yep. And it's that kind of Western action. It has kind of a Western feel to it. It's a bit crisper, and we talk about progressive actions. And Tom, from a rod designing standpoint, what he saw when he was a guide is he saw that his clients consistently struggled with casting accurately divisible fish. And so his solution to that problem when he started making rods was to have very sensitive tips on his fly rods. So you could feel the line loading, feel it tracking, feel where you're aiming your fly to, where you want it to land. And then also when you're catching and hooking fish, it's more sensitive and forgiving. So it allows you to land larger fish consistently on smaller flies. So that's kind of the ethos of what he saw as a guide in West Yellowstone and Ennis area. And that translated into design principles that were really important to him. And really it all goes back to this idea of making people better fishermen. I heard a quote the other day and it was great. I think it might have been Kelly Gallup. He said, your job as a guide is to take somebody that's not a great fisherman and make them a better fisherman. Your job is not to take the ace guy out.
Yeah, right.
And convince him to do things your way. Your job really is to make people better fishermen that need to have a lot of room for improvement. And I think Tom saw an opportunity in making rods to make anglers better anglers. And that had to do, again, with accuracy and presentation and hooking fish.
I definitely noticed it out there, how accurate that rod is.
Right.
I could hit every rock, puddle, anywhere I threw that rod, I could pretty much hit it with that line tip. Yeah, it was super accurate. And I love what you say about making fishermen better. And I think that even includes the ace fisherman is making them better. Like, you have to be a constant student of the game. And no matter how good you get your skill set or how much you know or learn, I learn something every time I'm out, and especially fishing with really good fishermen. Sometimes they just have a different style or a different way they go about it. But I am constantly learning. I've been fly fishing for 30 years, and I still learn almost every time I'm out. Like the latest one is fishing with this buddy, and he would so we all kind of fish streamers here. At least I got that idea as we started talking around. But he would throw a streamer, and he'd throw it at the bank, where standardly you'd start to strip that back to the bank. But what he would do is he'd throw a huge mend downstream and then start stripping it, so it would pull that bug down that seam instead of straight back at the boat. And I'm sure we get that same action from casting, back at a 45 kind of in the back of the boat and coming back, and we always get a lot of fish that way. But I picked up that tip as he'd throw it, and then he'd swing that big man and he'd swim it down that seam, and he was picking up twice as many fish as I was doing it that way.
Yeah, if you're, I always think of that as the South Fork of the Snake down in Idaho is, you got to cast within a streamer's length from the bank. You got to put it right next to the bank, and then throw the biggest men you can downstream. And you want 6 or 8 feet of that thing coming parallel to the bank, 6 inches off the bank, and that's where you're either going to get it then or you're not going to get it.
Yeah, we have a friend who's a guide. He calls that laying the tracks. He says 6 inches is too far from the bank, and then big downstream men, you just go parallel. He calls it laying the tracks and then driving the train. You're just chugging down the bank.
Makes sense. Well, and that bug gets down there quick too, because you're pulling it, down through the current. It'll drop.
Yeah, that's one of the things I really believe in too. Is bait fish don't swim against heavy currents. They just can't. They're going to be downstream or they're quartering. They're not going to be going up. I've caught plenty of fish dragging a streamer straight upstream, so it's not 100%, right? But when you think about it, biologically, a little fish is going to swim downstream if he's moving.
Yeah.
It's just more energetically favorable.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting technique, and you're right. I mean, I think one of the things that is great about fly fishing, I think for me, all of us really, your body also changes as you get older. You're never the same fisherman. I can't wade to the places I did when I was 20. I can't do the same things the same way. So you figure out new tactics or new ways to access those fish.
And always learning.
Yep.
It's just always applying. Like every day is different out there, but if you can pay attention to it and what's happening, and I should be better about jotting it down in my notebook so I can refer back to it. All of us should be, but just trying to remember those conditions and what created that good fishing and trying to recreate it. But it's fun. I think it's why we like it. It's a constant challenge. If you had it all figured out and every day you went out, you knew you were going to get them, it stopped being fun.
Yeah. I think what's funny is my phone has kind of replaced my fishing journal a little bit, because I'll say, I remember fishing this river when this hatch was going off. A good example, I wanted to go to the Oahe with my son in April and just go fish for a little bit. And I was like, when was that hatch that I was there 3 years ago? And I started scrolling through my pictures and I found the date. And I was like, that's it. That's when it was. So that's been really nice to be able to use that as a resource.
Yeah, it's so funny you say that. I've been doing that same thing as I look back at pictures and then I'll see the date. And it's not always that exact date, but around that time is when you should be looking for that hatch to come off. How cool.
Yep.
Yeah, well, those actions have great rods, or those rods have great action. So I was casting a 4-weight out there, and I'd imagine that as we step up in weight class, even to those 6 and 7s, it's got that same action, and that, I'm not the best at describing rods, but it seems like you got a lot of feel to the tip of it.
Yeah. And I think, one of the things as modern rod design has moved away from this, progressive taper means you've got a really fine tip for us, but then we go back to the butt at an even rate of taper the whole way. So it's just an even slope all the way back to the butt. And what that does, you have to wait a little bit on that back cast, but it lets the rod flex all the way to the handle and load, but then there's still plenty of power when you come forward. And more modern rods will be stiffer throughout most of the rod and then have some tip flex, getting up higher, which makes for somebody who's learning to cast or throwing big rigs, multi-fly nymph rigs and stuff like that. You want that power just to be able to roll the line over. But what you sacrifice by gaining that power is you sacrifice feel and accuracy and feeling that energy load. So
the finesse too.
The finesse, yeah. And I think I'm the first to say, there's different rods for different situations. There's a time and a place when I wouldn't want our rod. If I was fishing down at Gray's Reef and I had 3 flies and I really needed to just get that mend over and that kind of thing, I'd probably want that stiffer rod. But from a casting accuracy standpoint, feeling that energy, and then as Joel talked about, a thing we forget about a lot is protecting the tippet. So the softer tip, when you set on a fish, a lot of these stiffer rods, you're just ripping the flies right out of the fish's mouth. You may never even feel that take, or you're snapping the fish off, pretty quickly. And with our rods, there's more shock absorption there when you set on the fish, and so I think that's something that Tom talked a lot about, was protecting your tippet. And I don't know, it's something I was losing sight of before we started doing the work that we're doing. I just kind of didn't think much about it. But
yeah,
I think,
and you think about fighting fish, head rolls, sudden movements, change of directions, all those things stress all those connections. And when your rod's stiffer, has a faster tip bounce back or refraction, it comes back to straight quicker. It just adds more force to the whole thing. When your rod's slower, we joke, like fishing fiberglass rods, it's almost hard to lose fish on fiberglass rods because they're soft. They're so soft. They take up so much of that tension and those sudden movements. It's really a wonderful way to catch fish, bamboo as well. And our graphite rods, I think, probably would be called more medium action to maybe medium fast in some of the higher line weights. But it's really all about more effectively presenting your flies to fish and catching them and bringing them to hand.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and you have such a great, when you can feel the rod load, you have such a better connection with that rod and what it'll do and where it'll cast. It's like more intuitive. It feels like you can really feel that rod when you're throwing it, more so than a stiff rod like that, which is what I like. So you guys are completely custom rods, and I've seen I'm seeing more and more of you guys out like on social media and things. So you guys do custom in orders. So what would you say some of the differences are from like some of these mass produced rods from you guys, a custom rod builder? Now you guys walked me through the plant and showed me a lot of that, but what would you say are some of the biggest differences?
I love that he called it a plant.
The plant, yeah.
the shop, sorry,
the main factory here. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
we got smokestacks up
large
top.
Facility here, yeah.
Yeah.
I like it. It's all working class. It's all, not exactly a plant. Yeah, it's a shop for sure.
No, I like it. But I think basically at every single step, and I don't say this to be funny, but if there's a harder way to do things, by slowing down, paying attention to detail, and if we think there's a positive outcome to doing that, then we'll do it. And what I mean by that is we could build rods a lot faster by changing our methods. Having handles pre-made on a CNC machine is one example. But instead, by really slowing down, sorting each cork, drilling each cork, gluing it up, shaping by hand, it takes 2 weeks, whereas in a big production rod facility that might take 15 minutes. But we think that the benefits when you're casting that rod, of feeling a connection to that rod and having a handle shape that fits your hand and that kind of thing, that it just makes a more enjoyable time of casting that rod, makes you feel more connected with that rod. And people are ordering these rods. They're not their first or only rod. These, people have a lot of rods and they've decided they want one of these. And I think it's to fit a space. They want that special rod that for that special day, the one that they'll put their name on and hand down to their kid. And, I think, so at each step, I think when we talk about custom, there's a lot of decisions that are made for aesthetics, but there's a lot of decisions that are made for performance. And they just take time, and it doesn't make sense from a high production, facility to make the choices that we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. I think when we started this 4 years ago now, a little more than 4 years ago, I remember somebody asking me, why wouldn't somebody just leave the company and make these rods on their own? And I remember being like, oh, crap, you're right. Like, what? That could happen, right? So I was talking to Tom about it. And Tom was a bit of it. He's kind of our sensei. He's like our Mr. Miyagi. Matt and I had never built rods before this. So we learned everything from Tom about how to do this, Tom and his wife Jerry. And I think the thing that's tricky about it, it's not complicated. We can teach people how to make a rod this way, but you have to be absolutely committed to every step, like Matt said, to the best way to do it. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you discover an even better way to do it. And sometimes I think we are a little trapped by that in some ways. Like there could be a really easy way to do a step that we're doing in a very complicated way. We don't know it, and we only know one way to do it, and we're convinced by Tom and our experience that's the very best way to do it. So that may take 25% more time to gain 2% in performance. But that's just the commitment is really the hard thing about it, to be able to sit and actually do that the whole way. And then you end up with a rod that's greater than the sum of its parts when you have that commitment throughout the process.
Yeah, I like that.
And the quick summary, so we just kind of talked high level, but the quick summary is that the blanks are all designed by Tom and actions, kind of after his Winston days. One thing we haven't talked about, Tom was quadriplegic when he started this company. So he was in a wheelchair and had craftsmen that did the building for him, but all the designs were things that he talked voice to text to the computer onto these spreadsheets and designed each of the tapers that we have, and then would watch folks test cast the rods, and he could watch where they were flexing and how the loop was forming and make adjustments to the rod and then get their feedback. So pretty amazing process in the evolution of the blanks, but we're building on our own designs. And then as far as custom goes, you're choosing the length and weight of the rod, the number of pieces, the handle shape, the reel seat hardware, the blank color, the inscription. So there's a lot that goes into it that makes the rod fit for you, as well as makes it something that is pleasing to you when you get it.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, I love the evolution too of your guys' business and your guys' rods. That it's all to make them better. Like you say, if it takes 25% more work to get 2% more performance out of the rod, you guys do it. And I think a lot of that, like you guys were explaining to me earlier, like the connection between the pieces of the rods and the ways your guys' is designed and the way they fit together to not take away from the action of that rod. Also the cork, you guys talked about mass-produced corks and how they just fit them to the blanks and glue them and shim them. And you guys showed me, the wobble that can happen from the cork to the rod to where your guys' are put together so tight, and everyone's done custom, and every one is shaped by you guys on the sander to get the right shape and the right feel to that rod. And I think, you made a great point that when you put that much time and effort into a rod, its action, and all the details along the way, the sum is greater than all the parts. I think that's a great way to put it. And you build connections with these rods. When you fish a rod and you fish it day in, day out, like you start to feel like where you really get a feeling with the rod to where it's almost an extension of yourself, where you don't even have to think of it anymore. It just throws it where you want it. It throws the mends where you want it, and that comes from building a rod that fits you and also fits your style of fishing. But yeah, I just think that's so great the way you explain that.
Yeah, it's funny, we joke about it, but there's a rod. We got a bunch of rods when we bought the company that were kind of in the demo fleet, and there's a rod that's an 8.5 foot 6-weight over there. It's 23 years old, and I just fish it all the time now. Like I kind of even don't think about what rod I'm going to take. I just take that one, and you just get used to it. It's 23 years old, and I think part of that too is making a really good product that lasts a long time. I mean, I think Tom's idea was good fishing rods don't become bad fishing rods, because you're still fishing to fish that eat bugs in a river. Those fundamentals don't change. And I think part of what we're really committed to is making the same 6-weight that we made 22 years ago, because it's a great fishing rod. It didn't become a bad fishing rod because we have a new material or a new brand or a new line of rods we're introducing in 3 years. That idea of kind of planned obsolescence is really antithetical to what we do, because we want to have you buy a really great product that becomes a hand-me-down or an heirloom, or you give it to your son. That's the idea, I think, and we're really committed to that. And that's the only way we can make rods at the price point our rods are at, and that are made and sourced here in the U.S. and made by us, by hand here.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, you're right. That's how you build a connection with it. But it's just so nice to have you guys paying attention to all those details, and then the action of the rod, and then testing all of them as well. And being able to grade your own work or grade the action of the rod and be able to improve it or see where you could do it better. But yeah, that's just amazing. And that has to be a lot of some of the values and morals and ethics that Tom instilled into the company when he created it. And you guys are coming up, I think you said 25 years. Is that right?
Yeah, this year's our 25th anniversary from when he and his wife Jerry started the company.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. And I think, to echo what Joel said, we really focus on not trying to take our entire model line and dump it every year or two and create new rods. And people would approach Tom and say, 8 years ago I bought a 9-foot 5-weight from you, and what's new? And he'd say, nothing. Don't buy another one from me. You've got the right rod. And then if you want to buy a different line weight or something, that's great, or a different material like bamboo, that's great. But we're not interested in rolling over our model line, every couple of years. We're interested in just making a great rod and hopefully, like Joel said, something you pass down.
Yeah, so
and I think there's an opportunity there too, not to interrupt, but I think when you make the same rods over time, you really have an opportunity to focus on getting them all really, really right. You know, and I think we all have had experiences. There's lines of rods that are renowned, and you'll fish one that's really, really great, and then another line length or line weight and length in that same lineup might not be as good. You know, and for us, because we don't really name our rods, it's the 8.5 foot 5 weight, you know, or it's the 9 foot 6 weight 4 piece. That's just the rod, and we have a lot of time to work on those rods because we're not rolling them over into new things, or, you know, we're just trying to get them as good as they can be. Like, we talk a lot about chasing that 2%, you know, like when you talk about our handles and the way we make the handles, and, you know, the commitment to having that as tight a connection between the angler and the blank as possible. You know, I don't know who could feel the difference, really. Maybe some of the best casters in the world could tell the difference. But the idea for us is we know what the difference is, you know. It's almost like when you see a mistake on a rod, this happens to us, unfortunately, not infrequently. We see a mistake or a problem with a rod or a scratch we can't fix. The rod can't leave. You know, that's the decision. You can't, and you often see us huddled, the three of us in the shop. Well, what should we do with this? I don't know. What do you think? We're at the end of this. We worked really hard on this. But, you know, the consensus always is that the product has to be good enough to leave the shop to preserve Tom's name. And if it's not, we start over. We have a hard conversation with the customer that's been waiting 6 months and say, this is what happened, and this is what we're going to do to fix it. And, you know, we can't send you something that doesn't live up to our reputation.
It reminds me of carpentry and construction. Just you know, so I have a small construction company as well, and that's how I've made my living the last 20 years. And so it's not all from this podcast, as you guys might think, but no.
These gold-plated microphones.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, I mean, it goes into building a house and not cutting any corners, and the attention to detail, and never letting anything slide that you're not completely happy with or that you won't put your name on, and not cutting those corners in the entirety of a house. Now, you can build a house and you can get it done faster, you can get it done cheaper, but cutting corners in the insulation, you hear the wind blow through the house, it's cold, takes more energy to heat it. Like, there's all these details that go into it that when you don't cut any corners and you have the highest standard for that house and your personal work that goes into it, you get a much better house in the end. Like, that house may be worth double that production house down the street, you know, and it's going to last longer. Everything's going to hold up. It's not going to fall apart around you. And I draw such a connection between that and then your guys' custom rods that you guys are building here.
Yeah, it's funny. Go ahead.
I sit when I'm wrapping the rods, and, you know, we put the wraps on either side of the guide to hold the guide to the blank. And when I wrap the first one, I use a set of calipers and measure the length of the wrap on the other side going in the other direction to make sure that they're identical. And somebody asked me, who I was teaching to wrap, said, well, why do you do that? You know, you try to get them exact. And I said, well, if I cut corners here, where else might I be cutting corners? So if a customer looks at that and they're not equal, that, you know, they should start looking elsewhere for where things have been, you know, shortchanged. And so that matters absolutely nothing. Here's a secret from the podcast. You know, the length of your wraps will not help you catch fish. But it is one of those things where if you let yourself slide, you have to make sure you kind of self-check. If you let yourself slide there, then when during final inspection of the rod before we ship it to a customer, we might convince ourselves that little scratch Joel was talking about is okay this time. And then if you let that one go,
we're looking at it under magnification. Nobody will look at it under magnification.
Yeah, but you know, so it's a mindset, and if you have to live that mindset every day that you're building, is that it's got to be right or it's not, or you start over.
And I think one of the things that drives that a little bit too, and Matt talked about this when we were doing the tour, we never in our shop are just making a 9 foot 5 weight that's going to be sent to Arizona or something. Every rod pretty quickly becomes a person's name. You know, and so when we're talking about rods in the shop, we're talking about production, we're talking about the Smith rod or the Botar rod or the McClellan rod, or they all have names to them, you know, and so we talk to the people who they're going to, and we are really lucky to have a connection and be able to figure out where people fish, where they live, what they want, you know, what the rod means to them in some cases. You know, there's stories of people that saved for them or bought them to remember somebody, or, you know, bought them for a special occasion. So they become something you become a little invested in. There's no anonymity really when it comes to accountability in my mind, and we lose that anonymity pretty quickly with the products we make. So that drives accountability, I think. It drives quality too, when you have that connection to the products you're making and the people that will receive them. And I know I came from a very anonymous corporate background where, you know, it was hard to feel that connection on a daily basis. And I think that's what I didn't want. You know, as we went into this venture, I wanted the ability to be connected to what I made and have it have a real effect on people when they got it.
How cool. Well, and that's the difference between a custom end rod is those clients will call you guys and then you guys will talk over the water that he's fishing, the bugs that he's fishing, lines, and how he's fishing it, and try to fit them to the best rod that you guys make.
Sure. Yep. And sometimes even beyond that story, there was a gentleman who had a favorite Winston rod, and his little girl, who is now going off to college, and she wanted to take his rod off to college to go fish, and so we were building the replacement rod for him, and she called us up and said, "Don't tell Dad, but here's a song lyric he used to sing to me, and I want you to put that on the inscription of the rod." And we shipped it off to him, and he called and said he was in tears seeing it because it just reminded him of her, and then her going off to college, and all these things. And so we're not just building a pole, we're building something that's got some meaning and something behind it. And it's not for everybody, but I think for folks that are looking for that, it's special.
How cool. Well, and you just don't the way rods are nowadays is that at least for me, I've got my setups and don't really need to replace them. Like once you find a good stick and a good rod and build that connection with it, it's your rod for life. Yep. How bad does it hurt your guys' feelings to see a busted rod come through the door?
I'm fine. It's great.
Part
it means
of it,
you were
right?
out using it.
Good.
Right?
Okay, I like that. Good.
When Tom was still alive, and we were early on in the company, a gentleman came in with a bamboo rod that had been pretty heavily used. And Tom, was laying in bed and was able to look at the rod, and he just started smiling. He said, "I'm so thankful that you're not just keeping this in a gun safe waiting for me to die so you can sell it. Like, you're getting out and you're using this thing every day, and that's why we're building and selling these rods, is you should go fish them."
What a great outlook. Yeah, I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you guys would like me and my rods when I come in. They're beat up.
We do cringe a little bit when we got friends that are guides. They're like, "Yeah, we could just leave it in the boat all year round." We're like, maybe you take that inside.
There are some finishes on it that would be nice to preserve. But I think that's the wonder of being in Bozeman too, and being in Montana to do this. I mean, we built a product that's purpose-driven in one of the greatest places in the world to use it. Mm-hmm. So we're really lucky that way. We're not divorced from the environment our products go into. We're right in the middle of it. So that's a great way to inform your design and your choices.
Oh, how cool. Well, and how cool guys can bring in their rods and get a tip fixed and talk to you guys and tell you the stories behind that rod that he's had with them too.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. So that's a big part of rods, right, is the warranty department. And
sure.
I'm sure you guys stand behind those rods.
Yeah. I think, and back warranty department too, one of the things that Joel mentioned, but is, 100% of what we do in here, other than the cork grown in Portugal, is made in the U.S. And there are other small vendors just like us. We don't buy stuff from a big factory. It's, we know the person by first name who's got a little machine shop who mills that nickel silver part that goes on the top of the cork there. We call him up for more. And, so everything we do is supporting other little machine shops here in Southwest Montana, or then in the West, or, then in the U.S. And so we have a relationship with those folks. And so I think that comes, since that's something we value so much, I think it speaks to how we approach everything. And so warranty is no different. We, our approach is that if you were to slam it in your car door or something like that, we'd say, look, we're not going to make any profit on the repair, but you're going to pay for a blank and maybe some new guides that go on it, and we're going to get you going again. Yeah. And on the flip side, if there was ever a defect in the graphite or something like that, 100% you send it back to us, no questions asked. We're going to get you a brand new replacement piece there. And I just think I think some of these companies that talk about an unconditional free warranty on their rods, I've had it, and then they charge you a $70, administrative fee to send that rod back. Well, that's the cost of the blank and the guides.
Yeah.
Or they charge you, at one company charged me, I don't remember, it was, $80 or $100 per section to fix the rod. And I was like, that's not a free replacement. That's, that's the cost of parts too. So we just try to be really transparent. And I think when we say that to people, they don't bat an eye. They just say,
that's most of our customers, you're up front and you make a plan with them. You say, this is what we see, this is what we're going to do. This is what the cost, you just agree on a plan and go forward. But we're lucky because we don't make a lot of rods, so we can do that warranty on an individual basis. And I understand, big company, you have to have a policy. That's just a blueprint for everybody. But we're lucky and able to have that relationship and talk through it.
That's really cool. Yeah, usually I feel so bad when I busted a rod because it's something stupid I've done that I'd be more than happy to pay for the blank in time. Like, I just feel like a moron when I do. It's like my biggest pet peeve is when I bust one of those rods. But it does happen,
that 6-weight right behind you right there, second one in. We floated down on the Yellowstone, and my wife, bless her, she was trying to help get stuff out of the boat, but she put the rod up on top of the truck, and I'm coming out of Carter's, and I'm coming out, taking a right onto the road, and my rod just goes shooting over the hood of the car out into the middle of the road. And my son Hudson in there in the other room, he heard, a lot of choice words come out of my mouth as the rod went sailing past. But, that stuff happens. And
it does happen. You can't let it ruin your day. You just got to get over it.
And the thing is, 99% of the people are pretty straight about what happened.
Yeah.
I mean, Tom always says the rod tells the story. I remember right when we bought the company, we had a guy send a rod in from overseas, and he broke it fighting a fish. Must have been something with the rod. Okay, send it in. We'll see what we got. You get the rod, and there's a boot print above and below the break. And so you call, it seemed to us that, yeah, that's right. That's the rod I stepped on. Yeah. People are pretty straight with you.
They are pretty straight. Yeah, it's and a good group of people that are fly fishermen too. And most of the time, a defective rod meant that I hit my streamer off the tip of my rod about 5 casts ago. You know, if I really think back to that rod and the abuse I put it through, I'm sure I did it myself. So it's just part of it. But I had to ask, is I know rods get busted out there, and you guys probably see a few of them come through the door.
And it's funny in that regard too. You talk about materials a little bit. So we do make graphite rods, fiberglass, and bamboo.
Yeah, that's wild.
And we see most of our breaks happen with graphite. And the same things that are great attributes of graphite, light, straight tracking, relatively easy to keep in plane, also make them very brittle, very notch sensitive. You talk about hitting with a streamer or a cone head or something like that. Whereas with bamboo and fiberglass, they're softer, they're more resilient. Very, very hard to break bamboo or fracture it the way a graphite rod does. But bamboo has more labor, it has more cost in it. So people see cost and they equate that to durability or longevity, and there really isn't much correlation between the two of them.
Gotcha.
The bamboo rods we don't do it anymore. You can stand on a bamboo rod, it won't break.
Oh wow!
Because it's an organic material, it's a grass, so it bends. It doesn't shatter or notch like a graphite rod would.
Man, wild. The bamboo and then the fiberglass. Yeah, those are I do have a bamboo rod that was passed down to me, and I don't fish it, but I probably should get out and just fish that thing just to feel the action, to know how it fishes. So you say they're really soft, huh?
Yeah, and so compared to a lot of traditional bamboo that was a solid course, bamboo is. Ours are 6-sided rods, but it's 6 triangles. So think of like the Trivial Pursuit, triangle pizza pie thing. So 6 60-degree triangles that make 360. The older, slower ones, that triangle was solid. But since Tom, grew up fishing here, and often, the wind comes up and you got longer casts and things, we hollow out our rods. So we take the center core out of that bamboo. So those triangles.
Tip of the triangle.
Yeah, those triangles have a hollow core in the middle, which makes our rods actually a little bit faster than some of the traditional bamboo. They recover a little bit faster, so a little bit more stiffness for the wind. Certainly slower than graphite, but it's a great feeling. You're not out there trying to nymph fish with them, or even you could streamer fish with like our 836 weight, but it's really, you would take it up that side channel when you have a little blue-wing olive hatch or something like that, and you're just casting to a rising fish, and it just brings a smile to your face just throwing and just having it just really feel and really responsive to your hand.
I always joke with bamboo. From the time I get out of the car, we talked about this a little bit earlier, you just have a little more swagger, right? You're like, you take a little more time, you put your rod together a little differently. You just have a different feel to it.
Yes.
It's like hitting a baseball with a wooden bat. It just is there's more of a tradition and a connection to things when you fish a bamboo rod, I feel like. And like Matt said, it's really, a specific place. You're not going to go out on a day when it could be 30 degrees in the morning and 70 in the afternoon and the wind's blowing, and but you're going to a spring creek or a special spot and you're pretty sure you're going to be fishing little dry flies. Like, there's nothing that's better than bamboo as far as feel, and just that whole experience of being connected to nature and using organic materials and all that kind of stuff. But it's funny, we get that question a lot, and we still probably sell 85-90% graphite. It's just where the market is, but bamboo rods are really special to us because of the extra attention they get when we make them. You're starting with a raw piece of wood and making it into a fly rod at the end of the day, and there's a whole bunch of steps in between those 2 points, but there's a lot of care that goes into them, and that's just a really special rod. And as Matt said earlier, some people buy those rods to hang them up in their library, and some people buy them to fish every day, and we see the whole continuity between the two of those. But it's great to see somebody buy the rods that wants to use them and experience them as fishing tools.
The other thing that's pretty cool, you can see Rick over there on the other side of the shop is setting up. we sell some tooling for building bamboo rods, and we also do classes. So,
Oh, wow.
like this week on Wednesday, we've got four guys coming in that'll spend a week with us, and they'll start with a raw culm of bamboo, those poles over there in the corner, and they'll end up a week later going home with a rod that they built for themselves. So,
oh, wow.
if you think it's special to tie your own fly and go out and catch a fish, wait till you spent 40, 50 hours planing strips of bamboo, gluing them together, wrapping them, coating them, and you built this rod and you go out and catch your first fish with that. That's a pretty special experience.
Yeah, it's a cool connection. Yep.
Really special. Yeah. I love how you guys describe the experience of it. Like, you guys described it perfectly where my brain can make sense out of it and go, yeah, like, I'd like that. Like, that'd be fun.
Yeah.
Like you say, having it all strung up in the boat with a dry fly, and you head up that back channel and you start throwing. Or like you were saying, Joel, like having a special small crick, and we had talked to one of the cricks that sits over by me that we both like to fish. Like,
Yep.
that would be a fun one to take that rod
Well, you'll
and
see
have
us
a
one of
day.
these days on the Madison, and we'll have eight rods in the boat. There'll be the 4-weight bamboo for the side channel, and the 6-weight for the main channel, and the streamer rod. And
Well, and the experience can make the day. One fish on a bamboo rod like that up a side channel can make the entire day.
Absolutely.
Where you just think, God, that was so cool to watch that fish come up and eat that, and to feel it and have it all happen. That, it was magic.
that's another thing we talk about, too. I mean, like Matt said, a lot of our customers, we kind of have a strong idea of who most of our customers are. And this is rarely their first fly rod, when they come to us. But I think that we talked about this, kind of your growth as a fly fisherman. And some people it takes 2 years, and some people it takes a lifetime. But you start out just hoping to catch a fish, right? I just want to catch a fish on a fly rod, right? And then you get to where I want to catch a lot of fish on a fly rod, right? And then you want to catch the biggest fish that you can catch on a fly rod. Then eventually you get to the point where you say, I just want to fish the way I want to fish. And whether that's sight fishing on a side channel to 2 trout in a day, or whether it's bombing down on a boat and taking all your friends and trying to get them into fish, or, you pick this way that you want to do it. And whether that's streamers or just dry flies or, whatever it is, you kind of figure out you want to do it on your own terms. And most of our customers end up in kind of that last stage when they find us. They say, I want to fish a bamboo rod like I did when I was a kid, or I want to try a fiberglass rod because I've never fished one. Whatever that choice is, it's to dictate that experience. Yeah.
Well, and all of us make that choice as fly fishermen. We go out with our fly rods and want to do it that way.
Yep.
Whether I'm fishing the Olympic Peninsula for steelhead or the flats for tarpon out there, like, I don't want to cast a spinning rod. I want to catch them on a fly rod.
It's a lot easier to catch a permit with a live crab. Spin rod.
Yeah, absolutely it is.
a
I've
fly
seen
rod.
it.
Yep.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep.
Yeah, but so I think we all have that inside of us to one degree or another, which makes it fun. And I'm excited. I want to throw. I know I've talked about your 6 and 7 weights already quite a bit, but I do want to feel that 7 weight and that action on it, because I think that action of that rod, if it throws like that 4 weight will be a real advantage throwing and pulling streamers. Having that tip sensitivity is so important. Like that, we were talking about the strip and pop that'll kind of give those streamers, but a lot of times those fish hit after the pop when I'm just stripping slow, and the bite is so subtle on that that you need that tip to be able to feel. And if you get too stiff a rod, you can't feel it, and you never catch a fish doing it that way. Where if you've got that sensitivity, it almost feels like that after you give that pop, you're slowly sliding that line through before you give it the next pop, and you just feel that little bit of a resistance or that little bit of a tug, and then from there it's a hard set on the hook and you got them. But if you don't get that feel for it, I think you catch a tenth of the fish fishing that way.
And even one step farther, when you talked about custom rods, if you and I were talking on the phone and you were describing that to me and I knew what I knew about you, I'd say, great. So you live in Ennis. We're actually going to build that 7 weight as a 2-piece 7 weight. So instead of having 3 ferrules across the rod, and a ferrule is a joint or a connection, and every rod has them unless you're fishing 1 piece. But every time you put a ferrule in, you're putting a stiff spot through the rod, and you're deadening the rod just a little bit. And Tom always said a raw 1-piece blank is perfect, and then everything you do beyond that messes the rod up a little bit. So if you and I were talking about it, I would build you a 2-piece 7 weight, 9-foot 7 weight, and just know that you'd keep it in the back of your truck or keep it in your drift boat or walk it down to the river, and you're not so worried about packability for the airplane. And that's going to create more sensitivity across that blank as you're casting it. So, that's a great example of how we would kind of
Or we talked
where
about
you
the streamer
fish
special maybe.
Yeah.
Or here's a research project for you and maybe some listeners. Tom had this technique called the Morgan twitch. And so it was a way of fishing essentially girdle bugs back towards the bank to get the legs to move. So you remember old girdle bugs had real stiff leg material. They didn't have these silky, flowy legs like we have now. And the idea was to get a dead stop, right? So you get a pulse and then you bring up slack and you want the fly to actually dead stop, essentially like a jigging movement, right? And the eat 80% of the time is on the stop. And so this technique of his, he actually designed a fiberglass rod that's a 6-foot butt with like a 5+ tip. So it's like a Franken rod. It's not a straight 6-weight taper because he wanted the tip to be really, really soft. So when he moved it as he was pulling up slack, he could feel if that trout was pulling the lure or pulling the streamer in. You know, and so that's he tells stories about guys run through a hole, streamer, and he goes through and catches 20 fish behind him. You know, because he's fishing differently. He's not pulling and he's not swinging. He's actually swimming the fly.
Yeah. It's kind of it's a bounce.
Yeah, just like you were talking about, strip bringing the slack, pop string bringing the slack. Yep.
Okay, so I've got to try that with girdle bugs now.
I know, right?
Me,
well, we're getting close to that time, aren't we?
Now you got to find an old girdle bug.
Yeah.
I do like those silky legs, man.
I
Those things
know.
move in the
well,
water.
They do some of that their own.
They make such a difference from the rubber leg. It's amazing. Even in the same colors, those silky legs just have more movement. So much of the bugs is about like the life and the swim of them and the reaction in the water. You know, it's amazing.
That is a funny thing. It just made me think though when we talked about the Madison River and doing the opposite of what everybody's doing. And my son, it was last summer, he was in a fly shop and my son's looking at flies and the guy says, "Here, take one of these," and he gives him a Bitch Creek. And I thought, I haven't fished one of those since I was a kid. Nobody fishes that fly. He's never going to catch a fish on it. And so the guy gave him 2 of them in a little plastic container, and I was like, great, whatever. And so we were on the Yellowstone, and Hudson pulls out his fly box, and he says, "Dad, I want to fish with one of these." And I was like, "No way, man. You're never catching a fish on this thing." And so we tied on, and it was probably like 0x leader. It was 3 feet long because it had been cut back so many times. But we tie on this Bitch Creek, and we could still see the boat ramp, and he caught the biggest fish of the day. And it was probably because, every guide that's come through all day long is throwing a Pat's rubber leg with a little spanker behind it, and the fish are like, "Yep, there goes another, and then this Bitch Creek came through, and they're like,
orange.
My granddad told me about that thing. Take it.
There's something about traditional, like just like you guys' rods and the action hasn't changed much. There's something with those traditional flies, the Prince Nymph or the trying to think, like you can even bring back some older flies that were really good that now nobody's fishing anymore, and you'll light them up. It's so funny.
It's funny, we were joking earlier about swing flies, but I don't think fish here see a lot of intruder style swing flies. And so one of the ideas is, well, maybe you swing these deep because they're seeing a lot of stuff stripped horizontally. And so I think it's a smart idea. The Madison was such a vexing river for me the first 2 years we lived here because I just couldn't make any sense of it. If any of your listeners have been to the Madison, the whole dang thing looks the same. It's not a riffle run pool layout. Like traditional rivers were where I grew up in Colorado. So the fish can literally be anywhere, and 8 inches can hold a 20-inch fish. If there's just a little bit of relief from the current there. And it just was, we finally kind of figured it out a little bit a couple of years ago, and it's been great ever since. But, we talk about that. It's just, you got to put your time in, put your time in and figure it out.
Yeah,
That's the reward.
Experience is the best teacher. But same way, I moved to the Madison. I was used to coastal rivers, and I didn't understand it. I just get my butt kicked. And I'd drive all the way from Ennis up to Bozeman to fish the Gallatin because I could understand it better than I could the Madison. Yeah. And since living there for 20 years and being able to fish that river a ton with a bunch of good fishermen, I've picked up some tricks and tactics. But that still doesn't mean that I won't get my butt kicked. Yep. Like that Madison, it can humble you on any given Sunday, you know. So it's just the way it goes. But it's fun. It's that challenge that keeps us out there again, trying to figure it out and make sense of it and why the day was good or why the day was poor. And it seems like those flies, as much as it is action, a lot of it too, you catch flies that you're confident in. Like the fly you catch like I have these patterns and these flies that have proven themselves to me, so I have confidence when I tie them on, and I've caught fish in this river with this pattern, and I know they like to eat it. And so I just fish better with that bug on. I fish with confidence. I fish it in a run thinking that fish is going to eat that thing, to where when I tie on a Birch Creek, or I tie on something that I don't believe is going to work, I don't have the confidence. I'm going to try it for a little bit, and then I'm going to switch it up, and I'll try something else, or run a few drifts through a hole, and if it doesn't light it on fire, then I'm ready to switch. But a lot of that has to do with just the confidence in those patterns and bugs, and probably has to do with the confidence in the rod and the line and everything that it has to go with it too.
Yeah, I found that they talk about that a lot in Euro nymphing, and the hot spots on fly. There's nothing biological about a chartreuse hot spot on a fly, but I seem to find that, like, when I'm tying them, if I put on a pink little band, I feel like that's going to catch fish, and if I put a different orange band on them, it's like, nah, and you just don't fish it with the same confidence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and we have good fly shops around this area, and so, the majority of these guys are not trying to sell you flies that look good, but it's just human nature. They can't help it. Like, people go into fly shops, and the ones that sell are the ones that look really good to fishermen, not always the best tied or best working patterns. There are a lot of fly patterns that are fairly simple out there. Gosh, I used to take, like, I love the salmon fly hatch, and I'll travel all around to all the different rivers, and I'll chase it, and I have my timings on these rivers, and I have my patterns that work, and my salmon fly pattern, it's since my buddy has now sold this pattern to Umpqua, but it used to be the F salmon flies, It's got a little bit more colorful word to it, but it was this flutter bug that had these wings to it. But it'd take me 45 minutes to an hour to tie one of these flies. But then when the hatch is really going, I can go out with somebody with a piece of yarn or this piece of elk hair on it that just looks like trash, and he'll catch just as many fish as I will, And here I spend an hour tying this bug and thinking that all these little things make the difference, but it's kind of the fun of it too. And when definitely there's some patterns out there that are just meant to be sold to fly fishermen that look like they're going to be fishy that you can't catch any fish out of. And sometimes these simple 3-step, 4-step, 5-step patterns are the most effective patterns out there. And it's not what it looks like to me dry in a fly shop or holding it up to the light. It's what it does in the water. And some flies that don't look very impressive in person can really swim in the water.
It's funny. We go over, there's a really, I think, one of the better fly shops in the U.S., pretty close by. And I go in there and look at the streamer bins. They have a lot of streamers, and I love looking at streamer flies. And I talk to the owner, who's probably one of the fishiest guys I know. And I always say, what do you think about this big yellow honker thing? I like the woolly booger. Really? Just a little black. What about this big old pink thing over here? You like that? All those big things catch me, and he always just says, I like to just fish that little woolly booger over there. And he's a tremendously fishy dude. But it's funny. You're right. It's what you're confident in, and it's also not always what catches the fisherman. I have so many of those pucks. They were the regional specials wherever I went. That are sitting at home full of flies, and they're not in my bag.
Right? Half the time I do that just out of respect. If I'm going to go into a fly shop,
Totally.
in a new river, and I'm going to ask them for a shuttle number, or I'm going to, ask them for flows or something. I buy a puck of flies just to, just out of, quid pro quo for that. But, one of the things I've learned over time that people listen to this, if they don't already know it, the best time to buy flies is go in when the guides are getting ready with their clients, and just kind of watch over their shoulders as they're filling their own pucks out of the bins, and just follow behind them, and get your own going, because that's what's going to happen today. Is what they're pulling.
Oh, that's a good tip. I haven't pulled that one myself, but I do pay attention to their boxes when they pull them out or when I'm fishing with those guys. Well, they just 100 days a year on that river. Yeah. They just get more experience than I do. When I can get out once or twice a week to go fish that thing, they're on it 6-7 days a week. They know what's working, and plus they've got a network, this circle of friends that they talk with, that they really fine-tune those patterns. So I love that tip of just following them right behind them and getting all the same flies they're getting, because those are the ones that are working. Yeah. But I do love just getting a few ties or a few patterns from every shop I stop at. And you never know when you're going to discover that next one that'll work, or pull that next that hero out of your bin that you've never used. It's going to light them up, It very rarely happens, but every once in a while, it's nice to have options. And a lot of times my confidence is being able to switch to different patterns that I know will work or that I want to try. And it's amazing, you were talking about Tom coming behind people fishing streamers and catching fish, and it's amazing sometimes you just switch up that pattern, and it'll make all the difference in the world. You know, that barely legal really swims good, another one of that Kelly Gallup's ties or whatever, but that green and olive barely legal, I've swung through holes and fished my streamer in through there and then switched to that barely legal and caught 5 or 6 fish out of that thing. It's just got a good swim and a good action. So
yeah, I mean, I think there's so many different strategies with streamers now. I think it's really coalescing around a couple of fundamental ideas, but I think one of them is if you're not getting follows or hits, just keep switching. You know, just keep swimming different flies, you know, because, you're not they're not going to all of a sudden change and grab what you're putting on them. But, it's funny, like rivers here, you know, they say, what do they say, that, you know, the Yellowstone is whitefish. You fish white and pink with pink cheeks, you know, and the big hole is brown and yellows, you know, and so these rivers all have reputations of what the predominant colors are. And you go in there, but you just keep trying. Just keep working it, you know, and hopefully by the end of the day you hit it. And then I've been on rivers too where we keep trying and we're catching fish all day long. It doesn't matter. You know, they're just eating streamers.
Yep.
Those are the best days.
Those are the best days. Yep. I like those ones as well. But there always is like some color that they seem to like a little bit better than the other one, or some pattern that they seem to like a little bit better than the other one. And that's why it's good, you know, when you got 2-3 guys, is to always be throwing different stuff to figure out what's working. And a lot of times you spend the whole day trying to figure out what's working instead of just going with the fish that he caught off white and everybody go to white. But that's part of the fun of it too.
Or then you have it, you know, we had a day this fall with a friend of mine who's a guide here in town on a day off, and I think we had 6 or 8 rods in the back of the boat. We're both rowing. We both know how to row, so everything should be just firing for us, right? And so we floated, I think, 4 or 5 hours, and we caught 1 fish between the 2 of us. And it was just that kind of day where, you know, we threw he guides it all the time. We threw every fly. We did all the right things, and we caught 1 fish, and then we turned a corner, and we went fish, 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 fish. But it was 5 hours of getting nothing, you know, and then it happened. And it's just whatever, the barometric pressure or what, I don't know what it was.
I think those fish move around a lot too. I mean, sometimes you just aren't where the fish were.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm convinced in that river they move quite a bit.
Oh, I've watched them in the Henry's Fork and those big runs, and you'll watch those fish, and they'll work up 300-400 yards upstream, and then they'll come all the way back down.
And
they'll run a circle,
bunch.
but they're always moving, and I think I don't realize that enough as well. And I've been on the bank on a conference call where I had to be on my phone and I had to take a business work call, and so I'm on the river and I'm doing a call, and so I'm sitting there and everybody's fishing different runs in there, and I'm sitting there and this 22-inch brown just came swimming up by me in the soft side of the hole. I'm not even sitting in a good spot, and he swam right up by me, and I watched him, and then he just kept going right up the run, and he was moving. I think you're right. I think those fish just move a lot.
I think they do too. Yeah.
But then it's amazing. I fished with a guy who, you know, he took GPS waypoints when he would spot certain fish, and he'd come back, you know, a week later, and he'd walk straight to that point, and that fish was sitting right in that hole.
Really?
You know, some of those big browns, I think, like you
Some of the
mentioned
big browns
earlier,
live in
that are
spots.
territorial, you know, they own that spot, and it's right for them, and the food comes through, and so he's like, let's go see if he's home, and we walk straight to that point, and sure enough, that fish is sitting right there.
It's real different too. I feel like the Madison is real different too. I know the Yellowstone, I think the fish get moved by the runoff some years. You have a big old runoff, it changes the riverbed, and it moves the fish all over the place. You know, in the Madison, you got that pretty consistent flow, so they're, you know, they know where their home is. You know, they'll move within a range, but they stick around pretty much.
Within a range. I like the way you said that. Yeah, gorge ice can displace them, or they'll move for food. Runoff will push them towards the banks, but they have those runs, those holes they like
come back to.
Yeah,
there's a guy in Colorado that fishes a little tailwater called Pacatuck State Park, and he's identified like 20 fish over 25 inches there.
Wow.
And he kind of knows where their hole is, when they move up to eat out of the riffle at noon, and where they go back to wait till dark. You know, like he's spotted them basically like a big game hunter. He'll take you out and you fish, maybe cast 1 or 2 fish a day. You know, but he knows there's a brown trout that lives under that rock that comes out at 11:15 and eats some midges for half an hour and then goes back.
Oh, that's cool. He knows that river, doesn't he?
But he spent a lot of time on it. Yeah. And he's really cataloged it. I mean, it's a little tailwater. Yep.
Well, and all you theorize and all the knowledge that we gain over the years, and a lot of it is bro science to what we see and what our buddies see. But then those trout will just break all the rules. They just, like, you think you got it figured out, and they'll just be doing something different. But, again, that's the fun of it, is the challenge. But yeah, well, I really appreciate you guys having me over to the shop here and seeing your whole process through the rods. So you guys are building great custom-in rods. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
Really our website, tommorganrodsmiths.com, is a great spot to see and check out. There's some great historical, background on the company, and just to be able to see some of what we do. And, we're new to the game, but, Instagram and Facebook, we try to be pretty regular about posting what we're building, and customers that are out on the water with our rods catching fish. We try to post, keep that stuff up to date. And but we're such a small company, you call and ask for Matt or Joel, and we'll sit down and talk with you about where you fish and where you like to fish and what kind of rods, and so we're not it's not a big pressure cooker here to sell you stuff.
Oh man, that's awesome. I just love supporting small companies too, owner operated companies. So so this may be a tough one, but how much do I need to stick away to be able to save up to get one of these rods?
So rods, our graphite and fiberglass rods are $14.95. Every model, we don't change if it's 9 foot versus 7 foot. And then there are some tube options, which I was talking about earlier. So we have a couple different options depending if you want more of an heirloom kind of presentation tube or more functional graphite lightweight travel tube.
Cool.
So there's some ways you can customize within that. And then our bamboo rods are $39.95. So that really reflects again the amount of time that goes into building those rods and the labor. Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So cool, you guys. Thanks for inviting me over, showing me the
You got it.
process, showing me the difference between a custom rod and a production rod. And to tell you the truth, I didn't really know the difference until I walked through, and you guys walked me through each step. And even your guys' guides, you were talking to me about the guides being smaller, that the line flows through it better. And there's all this scientific backing behind it, or you were telling me about, or that could be bro science as well. But you guys pay such attention to the details and are building such great rods. And I just appreciate you having me over and letting me cast the rod out there, that 4-weight. That thing was magic out there. So I'll definitely be in touch with you guys.
Cool.
So.
Well, I look forward to getting out on the boat this summer, and
Yeah, get the
we'll bring
subweight
a
out.
handful of rods and get together and go float some of these evenings.
Oh, let's do it. Yeah, I'm going to hold you to it. So.
Awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Cool.
Right
Thank
on.
you.
Thanks.
All right, guys, that's a wrap. Fun conversation with those guys. They're just building super high quality rods up there in Bozeman, Montana, and fun to see their operation and see how the process is done, and also get good insight into what makes a quality rod. So yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation. Those guys are diehard fishermen, so I hope to connect with them on a day on the water and be able to try out some of those rods on the river, so it should be fun. I'm going to keep in touch with them and see what we can put together. So great couple guys, great rod company. Make sure to check them out, Tom Morgan's Rodsmith. And then check out our sponsor for today's show, Avid Max. Absolutely everything for fly fishing. I really appreciate their support. And I also appreciate your guys' support. Thanks for downloading the podcast, rating and reviewing it. It really helps on the, on iTunes and things of that nature to help spread the word of the podcast. And I just want to continue to try to grow this podcast and keep it rolling. So thank you guys for your support. So with that, I'm going to get my stuff packed up here. It's Wednesday now. I think I'll take off Friday midday, and we're going to go do a camping trip. Buddy Dylan's going to be there, and I'm going to load up my boat and everything I need, stay in a wall tent, get a good campfire going, and float some sections of this river and see if we can't come up with some giant brown trout. So should be super fun. So just getting all my gear together and pumped to go find some springtime fishing. It's winter's starting to loosen her grip on us, and we're starting to see some springtime weather. In fact, I heard the eastern part of the state is supposed to be 60 degrees this week, so should be fun to get out, soak in some sunshine, and try to wear out my arm throwing that rod around. So be a good time. I'm looking forward to it. So I'll share with you guys how I did, and then also want to put together that solo springtime podcast. And I also want to try to get these guys in fishing camp. We'll get them on a podcast and kind of talk over how we did or how we're doing, and hopefully it's all rainbows and butterflies. Hopefully it's a bunch of big brown trout and we're getting them good. We're all excited. So that's always the plan or the goal, but should be fun nonetheless. So thanks again, guys. I appreciate the support, and check in with you guys next week.